Every great empire in history thought it would last forever. Rome, the Dutch, the British. But none of them did. Ray Dalio spent 50 years studying why empires rise and why they fall. And what he found is both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The pattern always repeats. And right now, we might be living through the most important turning point in a century. This is Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. Let's get into it. Before we get into the big ideas, let me give you some context on who Ray Dalio is and why this book matters. Ray Dalio is the founder of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world. He's been studying global macroeconomics for nearly 50 years, advising governments and central banks, and predicting major financial events before they happened. A few years ago, he started noticing something troubling. 3 things were happening simultaneously that had never happened in his lifetime, but had happened before, many times throughout history: massive debt at near zero interest rates, extreme wealth inequality and political polarization, and a rising power, China, directly challenging the existing world order led by America. The last time all 3 happened together was 1930 to 1945. That ended in the Great Depression and World War II. That realization is what drove Dalio to write this book. It's part history lesson, part investment framework, part warning, and entirely worth your attention. So let's start with the big picture, the framework that ties everything together. The first Dalio's central idea is what he calls the big cycle. Over the past 500 years, he studied 9 major empires: the Dutch, the British, the Americans, the Chinese, and more. And across all of them, he found the same repeating pattern. Here's how the cycle works. A new order emerges after a major war or revolution. The winning power sets the rules for trade, for money, for international relations. This creates a period of stability and prosperity. Education improves, innovation accelerates, the economy grows, the empire gets rich. But then, over time, the cracks appear. The empire overspends. It takes on debt to fund wars and maintain its dominance. The wealth gap between rich and poor widens. Internal conflict rises. The currency weakens. Other powers start to challenge it. And eventually, sometimes through war, sometimes through slow decline, a new power takes its place. And the cycle begins again. Dalio tracked this with 8 key measures: education, innovation, and technology, competitiveness, military strength, trade, economic output, reserve currency status, and financial center status. Every major empire followed the same arc: up, then down. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and a little uncomfortable. The second idea in the book is about money, specifically what happens to reserve currencies over time. Here's a fact that might surprise you. Since 1700, roughly 750 currencies have existed in the world. Today, only about 20% of them still survive, and every single one of those survivors has lost significant value over time. Why? Because empires always follow the same monetary playbook. They start by backing their currency with hard assets, gold, silver. As they get more powerful, other countries start holding their currency as a reserve. That's a huge privilege. It lets you borrow cheaply and spend beyond your means. And that's exactly what they do. They run up debt. They print money to cover it. The currency loses value. And eventually, trust in that currency collapses. The Dutch guilder went through this. The British pound went through this. And Dalio argues, the US dollar is going through this right now. Not tomorrow, not next year. But the trajectory is clear. This brings us to the third central idea in the book, the internal order cycle. Dalio says that within every empire, there's a predictable internal cycle, a 6-stage progression from order to disorder and back again. Stage 1, a new order is created after a revolution or war. New leadership, new rules, new energy. Stage 2, consolidation of power. The winners solidify control and build institutions. Stage 3, peace and prosperity. The system works, the economy grows. People are mostly happy. Stage 4, excess. Debt builds up. The gap between rich and poor widens. The system starts to strain. Stage 5, financial crisis and conflict. The economic pain triggers political conflict. People fight over who gets what. Stage 6. Revolution or civil war. The old order breaks down and a new one is born. And the cycle starts over. Here's the uncomfortable question Dalio asks. Which stage do you think the United States is in right now? He doesn't say America is doomed. He says the signals are clear. Massive debt, record wealth inequality, severe political polarization. That America is somewhere in stages 4 and 5. Not at the end, but not in the early stages of prosperity either. Now let's zoom out and look at the 3 great empires Dalio studied in detail. Think of this as 500 years of history in under 3 minutes. The Dutch Empire rose in the 1600s. Remarkable because the Netherlands was a tiny country with almost no natural resources or large population. What did they have? An extraordinary financial system, a powerful navy that protected global trade routes, and the world's first stock exchange. The Dutch guilder became the first global reserve currency, but they overspent on wars. Their debt mounted. Their competitors, especially Britain, caught up. By the 1700s, the Dutch Empire was in decline. The guilder was replaced. The British Empire followed the same playbook but on a grander scale. Britain led the Industrial Revolution, built the most powerful navy in history, colonized a quarter of the globe, and made the British pound the world's reserve currency. At its peak, it was the dominant power for over 100 years. But 2 world wars drained Britain financially and militarily. The United States, which had been quietly building strength since the 1800s, emerged from World War II as the undisputed dominant power. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement made the US dollar the world's reserve currency, and America built a world order in its own image, which brings us to today. And to the most important geopolitical question of our time. Dalio spent nearly 40 years studying China directly, visiting the country, meeting its leaders, investing there. And his conclusion is clear. China's rise is the most significant geopolitical development of our era. China has the second largest economy in the world. It's the world's largest trading nation. It has a highly educated population, a centralized government that can execute long-term plans, and a civilization with thousands of years of history and resilience. More importantly, China is following the exact same rise pattern Dalio identified in every other ascending empire. Improving education, driving innovation, building military strength, expanding trade, and gradually internationalizing its currency, the yuan. So what happens when a rising power meets an established one? Dalio calls this the classic dynamic of great power rivalry. He studied every major case in the last 500 years. When a rising power challenges an existing one, conflict, whether economic, technological, political, or military, almost always follows. The US and China are currently in what Dalio calls a multidimensional war, a trade war, a technology war, a geopolitical war over influence in Asia and beyond, and a financial war over whose currency and whose system will dominate the next era. He doesn't predict which side wins. He says the outcome depends on choices, policy decisions, leadership quality, and whether both sides can find a way to compete without the conflict becoming catastrophic. So what does all of this mean for you, personally? Let's get to the key takeaways. Here's what Dalio wants you to walk away with. 5 ideas. Number 1, history rhymes. The details change, the countries, the technologies, the weapons. But the underlying patterns of rise, excess, debt, conflict, and reset repeat over and over. Understanding the pattern helps you see where you are in it. Number 2, all currencies eventually devalue. No fiat currency has ever maintained its value indefinitely. If you hold all your savings in one currency, you're taking a risk most people don't even think about. Number 3, debt is the hidden time bomb. Empires don't collapse overnight. They slowly accumulate debt, print money to cover it, devalue their currency, and lose credibility over decades. Watch the debt levels of the countries you depend on. Number 4, internal conflict precedes external decline. Every empire that fell was weakened from the inside first. By wealth, inequality, political polarization, and the erosion of shared values. What you see in politics isn't random noise, it's a structural signal. Number 5, you can't predict the future, but you can prepare for it. Dalio doesn't say disaster is inevitable, he says diversify. across asset classes, across countries, across currencies. Don't bet everything on one system continuing to work. Let me leave you with one final thought. What makes this book so different from most books about economics or geopolitics is that Dalio isn't speculating. He's pattern matching, using 500 years of documented history to understand the mechanics of how power shifts. You may agree or disagree with his conclusions about where America and China are headed, but the framework he gives you, the big cycle, the debt cycle, the internal order cycle, is genuinely one of the most useful mental models for understanding the world we're living in. The world is changing faster than most of us realize. This book helps you see the shape of that change. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.